Hey guys, it's Fifflaren, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.
I do actually have some game-related questions. So here's one for you. I actually want to rewind. This is why I told you in this, because I know your whole career, I've known you a long time. I said we could jump around. So we'll go all the way back, though. This is a really old-school question, right? But it's actually one where I don't know where you come down on this, because I've seen, mate, I feel like it's weird, but even the NIP players buy into what I think are sort of like kind of a bit fraudulent narratives, because I almost feel like because you guys literally won the first 87 maps in a row and then like the first, I don't know, fucking 19 out of 20 lands, and like the joke was, it was almost embarrassing. Like the joke is you guys even almost felt bad how much you won. Like people know the story. When you finally lost to like VP, you're almost like, yeah, oh, great job. Like I'm so glad someone won.
Yeah.
Like that's almost fucked up with you winning that much. You're like, hey, it's good we lose one. Like, because obviously the joke is if you're someone like Pimp, it's like, I never won a trophy. Fucking hell, what's it like? So anyway, to bring it back, I would say this, right? Whenever any fan, because what it annoys me, because I'm supposed to be the historian, but they don't ask me. They just tell me what history was. And this narrative tilts me, mate. I don't know if you're going to disagree or not. You know the narrative of when people go, how did Nip go 87-0? Every fan, the first thing everyone says, they go, well, what happened was Nip was the only team that had salaries, and so they were trying properly, but then they make it sound, mate, like Very Games were just like, they make it sound like they were working fucking in a bakery, and then they come out like, oh, it's player lad this weekend. Like, mate, as far as I can tell, look, maybe they made less. Maybe it was harder to be as pro, but as far as I know, like Very Games was grinding. When they got into it, people like Fetish's team, the Poles, the Russians, like, a little bit of that. It's like, look, I get that it's people trying to be like magnanimous, like, oh, you know, like every team hadn't had the same opportunities. You know, we had source players and one, that one's the other one, you know. Don't you think that one's a little bit overplayed though? Like, it's not like having €1,000 in your bank account which made you shoot everyone in the head in the server or get right, like win every clutch. Like, isn't that a bit oversold?
I would say yes. And the reason for that is because it would be different if Counter-Strike came out and it was the first ever Counter-Strike.
Right.
And we got an advantage, you know, and like we have been playing 3 months before, and now these events start, and like people are just picking up a mouse for the first time. But it's like Counter-Strike had been around for 13 plus years since then, like 2 versions, like people knew how to play Counter-Strike.
Yes.
Just because it's a new title doesn't mean that people just become, you know, clueless to that fact. And I remember as well back then, like, yeah, to your point, like people are like, oh, the only paid team and whatever. Dude, we didn't start there early either. Exist was still competing in Fnatic very late into it. And a lot of these teams, what I do remember is, it's very similar to CS2, I guess, but what I do remember is you had a lot of these 1.6 teams saying, the game's never going to be anything. We're not moving over. It's garbage. We're going to be trying basically to do exactly what happened with Source, because that was exactly the same thing. Some people moved over, right? Like not that many. A lot of the new players from Source were new players, and then the 1.6 hardcore like stayed, right? And I'd say when we started practicing and stuff like that, we were. That's why like there's a famous story with Getrat saying that I was nervous coming into the Valencia event to play Very Games, because I thought that we were going to lose. And the reason for that is because like when we were playing, we did our first offline event at a Swedish event. We were not playing very well. We won the event. We were not that great. And then the scrims and stuff leading into it, we were not undefeated. Like we were not that great. There was a ton of teams that were definitely putting down the time way before we did. I think the difference was, and like I mentioned as well, when we started playing in NIP, I had a full-time job. We weren't playing 24 hours a day. Like we had regular scrim schedule because I had to work. So like I'd argue as well there of like, we didn't get like, there were some teams that jumped the gun later, right? Like the Navis, I think, or whatever, that like, oh, we're going to ride out 1.6. And as soon as it's over, we're going to go in. And I think that was like a few months after, and sure, they came behind. But the way that I remember is like during the beta and stuff like that, there was a ton of these pro players playing. There was a ton of scrims going on. I never saw myself that of like, oh, we have such an advantage of like, you know, we're playing against farmers. Like, no way. Like we came in with these tournaments knowing how good people are on scrims and how well they have prepared. And then for us, we just felt like we were like technically a little bit better. And I see all the comments now, like people still used to be like, yeah, but that was back in the day. Should they even keep the record or whatever? And all I'm thinking is like, but what do you guys think like sports looked like 70 years ago? Like, obviously, I understand now if people ask me now, do you think the old NIP can beat Vitality now? Of course not. Like, what are you saying? Like, it's totally different games. But like, you have to give, I think, props to us in terms of being the trendsetters. So like, you know, you'd argue like there's flip side, there's 2 ways. The first story is that NIP almost killed CSGO because they were too dominant and people didn't want to get in and whatever. The second one was that we helped elevate because we showed to people that it wasn't random. Like,
showed it was a legit
you could
game,
build a storyline. Yeah, you could do all of that. And sure, had we been undefeated for another year, because I do remember what ended up happening. We were so dominant where Valve had to remove maps because maps weren't being played. Nuke, for example, had to be removed because nobody played it because we just did not lose on the map.
Sure.
They like changed some other things as well. And it wasn't just like anti-NIP, but it was more so like, well, how do we get to a point where people are still interested? Orcs at the time didn't want to enter. You had a lot of free agent teams for the same reason. The Orcs were like, well, NIP is just going to win everything. Why should we go and like pay money to just finish last or whatever that might be? But I do think that changed like throughout. Like I just don't buy the fact that like people just assume of like we were the ones getting paid, like no one else was and whatever. Like Very Games at that time when they moved over I think a month after us, and they were paid throughout all of Source. They had the same comp coming into it. It was the same team, right? Like completely dominant. Like that storyline we had in the beginning of CSGO. Like I'd argue looking back at Very Games at the end of Source, like they have a very similar trajectory. They are extremely dominant. Yeah. So yeah, by far, it makes sense why they were the second best team at the time. And I can definitely give them that. I definitely feel like at the time I wouldn't say because we got paid, we got the advantage. I would say that because all of the players get reinforced, they wanted to move over earlier. They didn't want to take this chance. And then with that, it gave us the handicap of maybe getting a chance to play a little bit more. But it was all individual. It was all like playing the beta, just getting a feel for the game. If people think that we were all buttoned up, all I would say is like go back and watch our first games. Force doesn't even know how to throw nades. Literally just messing up nades. And at the end of it, like what it ends up being is like he buys nades just to throw them away at the beginning of the round because he doesn't want to have to mess with them after. It's like stuff like this. And it's like, yeah, we were not perfect. But I think going back and like looking back, yeah, don't compare us to the current best teams. It's like you would never do that with regular sports either, but like appreciate the history behind it, appreciate what we accomplished like under the circumstances. We were not kings. We were not like getting treated, a certain way or whatever. And if anything, going back and listening to me now, like if people hear me, like I had a full-time job. When I didn't, we barely got paid. We could barely pay our bills. Like there wasn't like this honeymoon of like, oh, they got everything handed to them, which is why they were fantastic. No, we had 5 really passionate players that wanted to make the swap and to try and create a legitimacy between the game and ourselves. And I'll give you another example here, Duncan, with that. I think in the beginning of CSGO, the game wasn't very polished, right? It not very popular. People complained a lot, right? Sounds similar to CS2. What did we do? We were never that team that went out publicly to speak badly about the game. We always felt like it doesn't help anyone. If we're saying that this is the future, who are we to go in and just bash it every chance we get? If anything, we have to believe in this game, because this is what we have put our eggs in the bucket, right? In the basket. And then we have to go and we say, well, how can we do to help elevate this space? Right? So we went to Valve, right? We flew on our own dime to go and help. We were the ones that did all this feedback on the side. We never talked publicly or poorly about it, right? It was always on the side. And I think what you see now in CS2, for example, when they first went live now, like you have just a lot of negativity. It reminds me so much about the beginning of CSGO. Yes. And it's like, the change I would say is, when I went to Valve, we went there and we saw that there were 6 people, working on this product. Steam works differently. They don't just assign people, right? Like you can pick where you work. So the fact that there were 6 people that were passionate enough to work on Counter-Strike, like for me, it was like, dude, I appreciate you guys, because any one of them could have just been like, I'm going to Dota tomorrow, right? So with that, I always came with like, these are the guys we have, right? And then I know for a fact heading into CS2, we still have some of those guys. Like the map guy that I saw, my first time ever seeing Overpass was at the Valve office 8 months before it got released, and it was completely different. The same map guy, there was only one person. His name is Magnar. He's still at Valve. And my thinking is, you're getting to a point where back then you were talking about, oh, they don't know Counter-Strike, there's no experience or whatever. These guys have now been there for a decade. And because of all the negativity, I don't know how much staff they have. Maybe they still have 6, maybe they have 20. I don't know. Again, it's not the staff's fault, right? They're there to be passionate and building out a game. My worry is like the negativity will make them want to leave, similar to how a player is. And now you've lost a person that spent 10 years working on Counter-Strike, and you're getting a guy that just came from Dota, right? What do you think will happen? Now you're having issues, right? Because now you have a guy that just doesn't even know the game. So that was always like our mentality in the beginning of like, listen, like there's a new game, like we have to get people excited for it. Like the interviews that I did was only positive. We have to bring the community together. We have to do certain things. Whenever there was teams wanted to have help, like we were not that like protective in the sense of like we wouldn't just scream about certain teams, like we would do this and this and this. We wanted people to get better. We wanted the space to grow. So yeah, I don't buy this justification of like, yeah, you know, there was just a bunch of genders playing against NIP back then. Like definitely not. I feel very strongly and proud about the results we did. And it would be different if we hit 87-0 and we were just like 16-0 teams. Like there's a reason why NIP Magic is a thing. Like during this 87-0, how many games should we have lost, right? And that comes with the fact that teams are actually competitive, right? They can beat us. It's just that we always had the upper hand. I went on a rant, but hopefully...
No, it's all good. It's all good. I'll say another thing as well that I think is quite unfair is when people say that, like they go, 87-0, or I even always say, actually, by the way, you can actually make it more impressive. Like 87-0 sounds insane until you realise if you look at, because that's maps, that's like the smallest tournaments at the beginning of the game. I actually always tell people, even when you lost the Star Series, you probably won the next 5 events after that. And then if you lost a few to very good, then you came back and won more. Like the joke is, it's actually like 2 years, basically. There was like 2 years where essentially a bad tournament for NIP. I remember charting this. I think it was 27 lands I counted or something. There was like 27 lands in a row. This team finished top 4. Like, if a bad day is the semi-finals, like that, fuck the winning all in a row. Like that level of consistency is impossible. I don't even care, by the way, this whole thing of like, but the game was smaller and less people. Well, in that case, by the way, since Very Games was awesome, why didn't they win a few? Why didn't they just win? But in fact, why didn't they pull off 3 months or 6 months or whatever? No one else could do it, you know. It's even the teams that took over. Like when Very Games took over, yeah, they were on top for like 3 months. And then after that, maybe it was like NIP again. Then later on, it was like whatever, I don't know, fucking Fnatic or whatever. Like other teams weren't doing it. So I feel like, as much as I understand, you do need to put in the context. It isn't now. There aren't like 100 teams all fine. Yeah, I get that. But people are downplaying how hard it is to win. Like 87-0 is one thing. If you remember that one where Team Liquid was on that streak of best of 3, best of 5 series, right? They got to 22. NIP has the record to this day at 25 in a row. Like, mate, to win that many series in a row. The joke is, I mean, even though it isn't, it is impossible. And the reason I say that is there's the reason one team ever did that. Mate, I think even in 1v1 games when people were the kings, I don't think anyone's ever done that in a 1v1 game. Like, surely everyone's had one game where you fuck up. Like, you say you have a bad day, the other guy does it. By the way, it's also, they talk like you're playing against, like, Joe Blogs from Swede. You're playing against fucking Shocks and Kenny S. People, by the way, who come straight out of Source. They're just bagging out all the gear. Dossier, all these these are monsters. These players are really good. Like, they're even good in these games. Like, people downplay how hard it is to do a streak like that and to have this level of greatness day in and day out, right?
Yeah, and then especially remembering, because I'm not sure if you remember the CGS era back in 2007, 2008, when they go Source and their North American swap over, right, from 1.6.
Yes.
And you realize very quick there when they swap over, a lot of the skills translate. They actually have become very competitive in Source, right? Like the famous Kogu, FNX, I think, was competing. Like you had a lot of like star players that was just very good. So like you'd argue that it translates, like you're saying, of like, you don't just become and you start from zero, from scratch, of like, no, like your Shocks in Source, like same thing with Force of Harbor. Like they were Force of Get Right in 1.6. They're going to be Force and Get Right in CSGO.
Yep.
Right. It's just that maybe they need a little bit more assistance, right? Like I'd argue same thing of like, I think the beauty of us making the team and the fact that we had 2 Source players and 3 CS 1.6 players, actually probably the best thing and the smartest thing preemptively without even realizing that you are basically like matching in of like that heavy like mid-round like individual into, you know, Source of like more strategical. Like you look at Very Games' last few games, like they are so strategical. Sure. Like you are basically like the Prime Astralis a few years ago where you're like, you just feel flash tornado. All that was Very Games. And being able to go in then and kind of, like you're saying, adapt. And we went to, this is not online, you know, this is offline. We went all over the world.
Yep.
Yeah, this is all over the world every week or every other week. And the problem that we had, that's why, like when you mentioned when we lost in Star Ladder, we're actually happy in that regard because we have gone so far where even heading into practice, we just don't know what to work on because everything works, you know, like, we were like, what are we supposed to be working on, right?
It's like the joke back then, I remember as an analyst, by the way, was it used to be worthless to say what the map win rates were because, like, spoiler, they win every game, so they're good on every map, I guess, 100% win rate. Like, how am I even supposed to know which map they're bad on, you know?
Yeah, so that's also why I feel like you had that little steep, like, decline in us pretty quick because we went from being so dominant. But during all these years, the only thing that we're polishing is like individual skill, or like we're adding some things, but we don't really know what really works and what doesn't work until like we get into those moments. And as soon as we start losing, now we're happy because like, oh, we actually have stuff to work on. Like, oh, that's great. Like, what went wrong? And I'd even argue this, and again, like maybe it's controversial or whatever. If you do look at that Star Series, look at where we're playing and look at who we're playing against, and then think about what shoutcasters were in their arena and all of that. And then after that win, I don't think they ever beat us again. Like, there's so much into it, and like you can only go back. You can be pissed that I don't think we were. I think if anything, like Patrick claps after we lose that, and he's like, dude, like what a feat we ended up doing. And same thing. That's just the how our team was built, right? Like I think you could also go and you could be very upset there. Oh, we should have won more or whatever. But it led them to like, oh, now we actually know what to work on. Teams are getting better, which is nice, right? Like we noticed that like, oh, actually, like we have to quote unquote try. It wasn't the very games that ended up beating us first. Everyone would have thought that would be the case, right? And they never ended up doing. They ended up getting, I think very games ended up becoming very dominant. They had a streak right before the first major. I think they had beaten us 2 events in a row before that. But then same thing, I think that shows our strength as a team at that time, because we're able then to come in feeling like we have that Very Games has the upper hand. They've just won 2 back-to-back events. We're coming in here a little bit of an underdog. And if anything, that was our final, which I think why the Fnatic final is, it was just such a wash. But we're coming in and we're saying, well, we have to adapt, right? But we have to actually improve. We have to do some things. It's the first game actually we go into where we have some anti-strats. And they pay off,
right?
It's versus Very Games, right? And like with that concept, it's like that feed now, like, oh, actually, like it's actually fun to mess with them. Like we can actually like figure out what they do, and then we can counter. Like a famous one is we knew that Very Games, if we rush out long on dust 2, we're T. If we fake rush out long, their answer to that was always they're going to push in B tunnels with 2 people. So there's a famous round there where we know for a fact we win that round. We're putting them in eco. We make that round, and it's a set round for Very Games. And we fake rushing out long. I'm the first one. I actually ended up getting 1 or 2. But the whole premise is that we're waiting for the guys pushing in tunnel. And what happens? They push in. And then all of a sudden we feel like geniuses, right? I'll be like, oh my God, we're straight gods. Like, oh, we dictate the game, right? And it's just like all that. But it comes with that, like, you have to have players that actually want to work for it. We could have easily just there after like, oh, we won, guy, whatever, no more, like we've done everything. But no, a continuous thing, a continuous drive to become better, to be better. It wasn't just like, okay, 6 months, like it's performing poor, let's make player changes. It was like, no, like we know what we have, we know what we can produce, like let's continue doing that. And to this day, Duncan, I don't think I've ever had a team with like so dedicated players before, right? And this is with like people having girlfriends and stuff like that, but it was just so very clear of like, this is what we live for. And that was awesome. We very rarely had arguments about like people not showing up or being like cranky or like, not doing certain. It was so rare for us to have that. Like literally everyone showed up on time. Like maybe someone was cranky, didn't sleep or whatever, but like no matter what, it was always like that of like, we're here to accomplish something. And you don't see that often, I'd say.
I obviously, throughout the years, especially privately, I've heard a million conspiracy theories, like your urban legends, like things that people just come up with like as a corp because they lost, but then they remember it as if it was true. And then years later, I mean, the joke is there's even people, even though fans are going to go mad when I say this, don't calm down. There are players who think other players cheated and stuff like that. Obviously, that goes without saying. But one of them that I've heard is, this is a new one, mate, so I've got to put it to you. I won't say who, I'll protect their identity for now, but someone from this era, one of the things when I asked them sort of why was Nip so good, what was so good at, this is a new one for me, so I want to put it to you. They claim, that, so this must be what some of the peers were saying and thinking. They claim, I think they maybe had like, secret access to the game before everyone else and like they practice. That's what someone said. Someone, a real competitor, by the way. People all know when they watch the interview. What do you think of that? Is there any truth at all to that in any context?
No, what ends up happening, and you know this as well, because actually, if anything, the only people that got access to play the game before, even Dunk or Lurpy was there. It was that like show match they had in Valve.
Oh yes, the I Am New York
one. First ever time they showed it, right? And it was a completely opposite game. And it was
it looked nothing like the game. Yeah, exactly.
From there into then the first launch of the beta, we had no access. Like we had exactly the same as anyone else.
Right.
And I even go one step further. When it first came out, it's not like we thought that the game was great. Like Freiburg had to force me to go in and play games. He's like, please, like I need a player to play with. Can you come and play? I did not like it. We had no extra, insight. Valve didn't like. I know there's a conversation about NIP was so close with Valve.
Sure,
Valve told us nothing. Like I said, the only thing that we had to take that ball in our own hand, and we said we're going to Seattle to see you guys, and hopefully you guys are going to open the door once we get there. That's what we said. And they were that nice enough. This is the first time we ever talked to them, first time we ever got any insight or whatever. We got the chance then to go into, and this is what, during arms race. So this is a year after CSGO is already out. But prior to that, we had nothing. And then during that meeting that we had, we got to see the office. They wanted to ask for advice because they were probably like, oh my God, there's a team coming. Like we have to show them, or like they have to ask them something. We got to see a very early version of Overpass to a point in which the only thing that I recognize from the map is the monster cave. That's all that I recognize. But we got to see a very early one. The map wasn't even done. It was just one bomb site. They asked us for the advice about how do you guys want majors to be? Do you want it to be like a TI, or do you want it to be like more broken down? And we said, and maybe this is the reason why we don't have a TI, but we said we don't want this space to turn out that the only thing that matters a year is one event and everything else doesn't matter. We said we would rather divide it up so it's like more things throughout the year. That was one thing they asked us about. And they also, the last thing they asked us about was the M4 silencer. They asked us if we thought that we should have 20 bullets or 25 or 30 and how many we should have in the mag. And they gave an explanation to why, right? And people forget as well, like players are fucking unreasonable. Like, you know that, Duncan. Like every time players have seen Valve and stuff, there's so many bad ideas that get thrown in there. And Valve is just like, oh yeah, you know, then they have to explain it. We were very similar. We're like, oh, we should be doing that. Like, why is the kit $400? It should be $200. Like, blah blah blah. And they're like, yeah, you know, blah blah blah. Reason why. And then the last of it, what we saw then, which is the skin update. So what we saw, what we got to play around with was basically like a crate opener. Right. That's what we saw. And so then when I launched the update, we know that the update has skins. We got to see that. And I think that's the majority of the update. Like I didn't see Overpass for a long, long time. We saw a tease of a revolver. No idea what it was though. So like that's to the extent we were involved with Valve.
Does that mean when that R8 came out, instantly it flashed in your brain? Oh shit! That was it. That was the revolver. Is that what you thought as soon as it came out?
We saw that 2 years ago. Right. So like imagine same thing. We saw 2 years ago and they had just released it and be like, dude, I can't. So like same with Overpass, we saw it like years and they just released it. Right. So same thing. It's like there's such a small team of like to go and basically to yell at the waiter when the chef is messing up your food. It's like such. Oh, good analogy, So that's why, like, I feel not like I'm just very respectful of these guys. Nobody can be perfect, but like now you've been in so many titles, Duncan. You could argue as well. Like, look at the mistakes that all these other game developers have done. Right, like Valve is not perfect. No. But I will argue that they have given us an opportunity to like try and basically go and do ourselves at least and like be successful versus being just shoved down and be like, hey, here's the TI. Like now, that's it, right? Like, no extra insight. We tried to get access to beta. We never had access. They tried one time to give access to betas for pro teams. And within 1 day, a German team had leaked the beta code. And after that, Valve said, listen, guys, we can't have this. Sorry, no more. And they tried it. We were not the only team. It was open to a lot of teams. That's the only access that we ended up getting. They pulled out within the week because of the same thing. People just can't be smart, right? It's just, let's leak this. Great, fantastic, man. And since then, we don't have that anymore. So it kind of just comes to show of like, the actions actually have consequences. Let's say that they put the trust in you to do something. Maybe let's not go ahead and leak it if you are asking for this stuff, right?
One thing I always thought coming from 1.6, and here's the thing, I followed Source in the sense that I do take my role as an esports historian seriously. Look, I don't now in the sense that like, if I don't like Call of Duty, I don't really give a fuck who wins that. Like I might look up on a wiki, but I used to like watch a big fight. Like, if they had the ESWC where Very Games played the fucking fetish team, I watched like that fight because I thought this is history. You got to watch the big matches. And I always used to like, because I was a news writer as well, I would know who was winning tournaments. I'd know when Very Games was on that streak of like 40 lands, and I'd know when these teams came along, or that story where the MK guy stole the laptop that Richard Lewis wrote, I remember, right? Which was just a classic banger, right? But the problem is, because I wasn't from Source and I was from 1.6, and spoiler, I know I mean, the joke is, when I keep saying this interview, I've mellowed over the years. All the Zoomers don't even get it. They're like, yeah, you're a hater. So you should have seen me fucking 10 years ago, mate. I'd give you some run for your money then. But obviously I was elitist even back then. So the problem is, I would give the analogy that it's a bit like Valorant now. If someone wasn't that good in CSGO, if they maybe just didn't have time to get to the top of the NA scene, for example, but then they go to Valorant and they're like the shit, part of me's always going to be like, oh, that's dope. Would you really have done that in CSGO? Oh, sorry, did I say that out loud? Like, but they'd have to sort of come back for me to believe. If they came to CS2 though, and they carried like 10s or something, then I'd be like, oh, fuck, fair play, you were that good. But what I thought was cool about CSGO was, it actually showed me, oh no, I was actually being too much of an elitist. Like, these guys are dope. Like, when I heard these stories of like Sharks and fucking Guardian and stuff, obviously you just think like, oh, that's cool. But you know, we have like Kogu and Delpan and that. Come on, mate. Let's have Fraud go against these guys. Let's see how they do. But I have to say, the cool thing about CSGO was these guys were gods. They were so good those first years. These massive names, Scream. Like, people can't understand because they saw them degrade. These guys at their peak, the big source names that were in early CSGO, they were amazing, right?
Oh, they were by far, and I got a chance to play both, right? Because when CGS happened, these 1.6, you mentioned Kogu. I got the chance to compete against Kogu. I think I played against Fraud, and getting a chance to, I will say, and it was fun to see because I did notice a difference. I like my first feeling playing against these guys, playing than Source at that time back in 07 was 1.6 players shoot a lot harder than Source players, but Source players are much more smarter. Like they have, because there's more tools to their like utility, they have developed in a way where these 1.6ers have a hard time. So like it went to a point where like, well, when I would peek at Kogu or like I would peek in FNX, I would get absolutely smashed like instantly. But they were very bad at adapting to like if I throw the flash because they're thinking it's a 1.6 flash. Like I'm barely even gonna get flashed. Yes. They don't have that. Like there's so much new things that come into it. So that's why it was fun for me because obviously I'm from the Source background and I get to go in and I experience the 1.6ers. Whereas like my mentality for Source players was always very high. Like they were smart players, they were much buttoned down, like they were execute heavy because of the way that the game worked. The 1.6ers to me, every time I talked to them was always like, your game's shit. We're just going to go up mid and shoot a bunch of people. Our smokes barely work, so we have to throw double. And it was like that of like, yeah, you guys are very skillful. Like, you guys say like when you see someone, you're very skillful. But when you talk about the game or like the strategic heavy side of it, you're lacking. So for me, that was very cool to see coming into CSGO. Like me coming in, I never competed at the end of Source. I did for one event, but I was never part of like the Very Game because Very Games era. Right after CGS ended, I played for another year, and then I was retired for 2 years. Right. 2010 to 2012, I moved to Dublin to same thing. I was always cautious about what am I doing if I'm not competing. So I accepted a job, and then when I was there, that's when I started competing a little bit more again. We had some rosters and stuff like that. So getting in to see it, basically what I saw was from a spectator point of view, how dominant Very Games ended up being, right? And seeing all these star players come in, like all of that, like there's a ton of like educational stuff back in Source back then where they would break stuff down and you would just notice of like, they are in a different level. Like they're timing their flashbacks, like they're doing stuff that you would argue that not even teams in 2013 were doing. Yeah. Right? Like, and you saw it when you would watch Very Games games in the beginning of CSGO, when they were not playing us. They looked so insane. Like, that's why I was always terrified, but they never played that game versus us. We never allowed them to. But when you did, like, that's how good these guys could be. And you mentioned the thing for Valorant, absolutely right. I actually used that kind of myself as well of, you would have then the people that felt either, okay, CS is not for me, or like, it's done. I think Valorant on the side, I had it with the fact that like all orgs stiffed at the same time. So it's like, well, I'm staying then and I'm not getting paid, or I'm going to go here where there's a chance for me getting paid. Yes. And now there is a reset. Like my accomplishment in CS doesn't really matter. I'm a veteran. And if anything, props to the players, right? Because they ended up getting like a 10x payday. But you'd argue, and I'm in the same bitterness as you are in the sense of like, well, they left because they weren't good enough. And now they're the top of their echelon in the other game. I heard that a lot in Source back then too. And like, I agree. Like I moved over to Source when I got the opportunity to get sponsored by an org. That was my reason why I moved over back in the day of like, oh, I have an ability here to join something that I don't have to now pay my own pay to travel. And it's a new game, but I'm okay with playing that. Right. And then my decision back then was, yeah, right. It was never about like, oh, I'm not good enough in 1.6. Like my belief wasn't there in that sense of like, I'm very well could be confident enough of like staying, but like, why wait if you're getting the opportunity now, right? If you're okay with the game. And I think that's really what happened with Valorant, especially in North America, right? I think it would have been very differently had not all the orcs dropped at the same time.
Yes, I agree. By the way, I actually have a question along those lines of what you just brought up. Dude, no one ever asks you this. Is this why actually you do need the esports historian, boys? Because it's actually, you have to know the context, not just the fact. So I'll tell you the piece of context no one ever asks you. This is bonkers to me. Is you played Saucer, you're from fucking Sweden, mate. Like, if you're from the UK or Denmark or Germany or I get it, those were the countries. And by the way, you notice those often weren't the best ones in CS 1.6. In 1.6, if you're from Sweden, like, I'll give you the analogy. In Korea, when I went to Korea and I asked people there, like, do you know esports? Right, actually, despite what people tell you now, they aren't all just super into esports. Like, there's nerds are into it. But what they would all tell me is this: oh, I know Brood War, because they said this is the line like taxi drivers would say. They said everyone played that when they were 12. And that was like, what a perfect line. I remember thinking, if people don't know, that's being in Sweden if you're a nerd. Everyone played 1.6. It was like, the joke was, this is why I know, when everyone asks that question, why is there no top Swedish team? Mate, take a walk into an Inferno online. Tell me how many people are playing CS2. You're not going to see that many. They're going to be on Fortnite and League and all the other fucking Rocket League. Whereas back then, if you walked in there, it's why, by the way, teams like SK and NiP had that fucking little room in there. The joke was that plexiglass, you remember, on the practice room. Kids, it's like they were looking into prison or something, like, or like fucking, a little kid like in a Christmas card, they're looking in the window at the family having Christmas. Everyone was obsessed with like Counter-Strike in Sweden at the time. So it's actually very weird that you were a Source player. And the other thing I would ask is this: dude, I actually think you would be better at 1.6 if you'd have played the whole time than at Source. Because one of the things people might not know about CS 1.6 is it's like the total opposite of CS2. In CS2 now, there's this like mad peakers advantage. So being really aggressive is like really like rewarded. CS 1.6 was like defender advantage, mate. Like, if you actually are a smart player and you play with your brain, it's why some of the players who never made it in CSGO were just like the sort of support players who weren't hard fraggers, but they could just like, they knew like how to play a 1v3 out or how to delay on the site or something. Like, I feel like you would have been a banger at 1.6. Like, was it early on that you shifted over? Like, what do you think to this? Because it's kind of weird to be from Sweden and make your career professionally in Source, right?
Yeah, the reason why it happened is because it's a small world. So I played 1.6. I started at the end of 1.5, or at the start of 1.5, or at the beginning of 1.4. I can't remember. And I played it every day. We were in school, like literally played it. I would attend local events with Windows. Like, I was pretty.
Oh, there was so many LANs back then as well. Like, there was a bazillion,
so many,
right?
So many. The reason why this even happened was I come from a very small city, like 5,000 people in the main area. One of the other guys in the friend group, he was a professional player in Soldier of Fortune 2.
Okay.
And it's just like, if you go back and you look at the game, you're like, oh, well, why does that matter? It's another FPS game. Not only were he competitive, he was in Europe's best team or top 3 team or whatever, and he ran his own org. It was called Northern Darkness, and it was the Soldier of Fortune players that was swapping over to Source when it first came out. So, and that person then ended up, he was close to be my neighbor. He was, I think, 1 year younger or whatever. I haven't really played with him or whatever, but he knew that I was, me and my friend were competitive in CS. And he's like, hey, I have 3 guys. I'm looking to swap over from Soldier of Fortune to this new Counter-Strike game called CS Source. I have an org already. Like, I'm looking for players similar to what happened in CSGO. And I'm looking for players with experience from Counter-Strike to come and kind of help us play. And one of the players we ended up getting was a CPL player from Source. His name was Eric, also Swedish. So that's how it came. It was very much on a whim. If that person would have never even, told me I was swapping over, I would have still been playing 1.6.
Right.
But because then literally almost neighbors, and I wasn't super close with the guy, but in their region then at that time, like, Solar of Fortune 2 was actually pretty competitive. I'm sure you have fans probably that's going to be watching this. Yeah. Oh my God, I used to watch Solar of Fortune 2. And if they did, it was called Northern Darkness. The captain was Kiyoshi. It had one of my first Source teammates in there, Experten, Swedish. He also played with Farberg until I think 2008. So there's some connections there. But that's the whole reason. And the whole reason was because I was still in school. My parents were pissed off because I was playing too much CS and I was not, thinking about school. And they're like, well, how are you going to make a living from this? Like, you're spending all the money that we're giving you to go to these events in barns and stables. Like, what is this? They wanted me to do sport. I did every sport growing up, right, until I was 16. They wanted me to continue doing that. And then when I got this like opportunity, then, hey, I have an opportunity here to play professionally. I'm not getting a salary, but now I have an organization that's going to send us to England to compete. They're gonna send me to Denmark. They're gonna send me to France. Who would give that up, right? Like when you're in a position, I'd never been, I've never traveled to England before for tournament. Now I have, even though it's another game, right? I think at that time we had also heard that WCG was going to use Source. So like there were some positive influx coming in as I made that decision. It wasn't just like, oh yes, I'm just going to do it. I played it a little bit. It wasn't bad. Like I can totally see why they like the 1.6 players would go and say that, right? And especially their first experience was WCG, and the game should not have been played there. Yeah. Compared to the end result, like I'd argue if people go back and install Source right now, it's actually not a bad game.
If people don't know, the famous thing it was when they did the red box update. When they did that one, that became... I actually did try it myself at the time, and it was way better. The problem was the early one. It's like if someone had only played month 1 of CSGO, they'd quit the game immediately and be like, this is garbage. Yeah. Obviously, it was really bad, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, the game wasn't ready for sure, right? And I think a big reason why Counter-Strike Condition Zero never, picked up, because the same thing, like Valve has always done what they're doing. And I'm sure people realize they launched Condition Zero in beta, basically, and they're continuing improving. They launched Source in beta, continuing improving. They launched CSGO, argued that maybe that was also not complete, right? Continue to work on it. They launched CS2, same thing, right? Because Valve doesn't do betas. This is their beta. And what better option is it to just go live? And I understand from the people, and especially competitors, it's like, well, this is asked for us, but it's just like, well, that's how they work, and they've always done that for the past 20 years. Yeah, it's an approach, so you just kind of have to live with it.
Yes. Right, this is an obvious layup, but actually, who knows? You'll probably just be too reasonable. Right, one thing I do think is this. I know that, like, in isolation, you can look at each of those major finals and be like, right, great game, Fnatic, actually. Who knew you would play that way? Virtus Pro, obviously, they were inspired. That was one of the best performances they probably ever played in their lives. But if you look at these first majors, the first 3 that you were in all the finals of, the sad thing about NIP only winning one of them, and even then it was probably the one that you shouldn't have won of the 3, is the joke, is I actually think if, as the historian, dude, it'd be way easier to tell the history of CSGO if the first 2 majors were just NIP. That'd be perfect. Yeah. That would like connect to the period before the majors. It would actually be sort of like a nice neat bow. I almost feel like, cause people forget the majors only began at the end of 2013 and CSGO began in like autumn 2012, it makes people like, they don't quite understand how dominant NIP was in the early days. I feel like if instead it was like the first 3 majors go, that almost like makes sense in history, because there obviously wasn't any for the first year as well. What do you think? Am I being unfair to the teams that won?
It's hard because I would even go back as well, right? Like that Fnatic game, I don't remember much of it because it is a bit of a blur, but it still haunts me a little bit because I think it's such a clear, like coming into the event, and I remember all the prep coming into it. We're just expecting to play very games. Like that's our mentality. We're playing very games in the final, right? Like nothing else matters. We're going to beat everyone. Like literally these are the guys we're having issues with. Coming into the event, I think something happens with the brackets that puts very games on our side.
They lost to complexity in the group.
Yeah, they lost to complexity, yeah. And then on the other side then is this Fnatic roster. And at that time for us, I don't think we have played them before. And if anything, definitely there's an underestimation. We feel like they have an easier side of the bracket. Look at that side. We have us in very games. Once we beat very games there's even clips of it, right? Like when we beat them, it feels like we won the event. Right. And that looking back is like such a negative, right? Because like we have spent all the energy, everything that we had for just to beat them. And then coming into the game versus Fnatic, you wouldn't just like, it's not like we're coming in and be like, we don't even have to play. But absolutely right. Like we are underestimating these guys because like we think that we're just playing very games. We just beat them now. Like who could be better than very games? Like definitely not these guys. And then coming into that final, like I remember like the map, I think we...
By the way, one thing people might not know, dude, is that semi and final were on the same day. You played very games, and then later the same day you played the final. The major was only 3 days back then. A lot of people don't know. It was just DreamHack. It was 3 days. It wasn't like now. Now it feels like the majors have all been the same. Like 3. No, this was like a 3-day event. So the craziest thing, if you look back in history, is how mad it is to play, like you're saying, the big game of the year, and then right after have to play a final. It's kind of actually a bit wild, isn't it?
Yeah, and that major as well. We actually had a TV crew. Like we had a TV crew the whole year, and the whole storyline was that NFE is going to go in with the major. And like we had, a 3-week boot camp coming. We were honestly coming back. We were so tired. like throughout that event. Like there was so much pressure on us in the sense of like, oh, the TV crew, like there's writing the storyline. We would then put all the time in like the Very Games game. And like that final versus Fnatic, like I think we lost us to.
It's like 16-14 or something, mate. It was really crazy.
And we have a really good T side, and we are shitting the bad CT side. Like we don't get going. And then still there, we're not super worried because one of our best maps is trained for third. And then we're coming in, and you can tell we like if you go back and watch that game, like the first 2 maps, fair enough. I feel like we're competitive, we're good. Train is no NIP. We have no energy left. Like we are completely we're empty. Like we get beaten up, I think, on last map. Absolutely hammered. There's nothing. So I think, do we deserve to win that event? I mean, at the end of the day, Fnatic absolutely deserve it. I think had we come in and looking back at it and like seeing things, like there's a reason why we had a lot of learnings after that event. Like the first one is like, let's not like, we can be happy about winning like group stage or like going through like Acadian, right? Like Acadian always gets like, oh my God, why is he so happy going through group? We had the same. It was actually consistent that like, I don't want to start celebrating until we win. So like during Cologne, for example, and I actually even think during Katowice, even the games that fucking hard fought won, you don't see exist celebrating. Right. So like that's the first learning from the first major. The second one, like I said, I mean, we knew coming into it, like VP was looking really good in practice coming into it. Like that's all we've heard. We've heard that they're just unstoppable force. We had some other teams that we knew as well was going to be hard coming into that. But as I mentioned, then like for me, like I came in, especially after the groups and the playoffs heading into final, being so dominant like we were. I was very confident coming into Katowice finals. Like I knew they were going to be good. I knew what we could be doing. We had then spent the day before in prepping. Like there's an obviously infamous one, right? Like we didn't veto Mirage, right? Like that whole thing of like, and looking back, same thing of like, yeah, that's definitely a learning. Like maybe we would have removed that. We would have won. But people don't realize this, that we scrimmed VP a lot coming into this event. But we actually had a chance on Mirage. Like train, we didn't have a chance. And then on top of that, I feel like once you play this map 7 times in an event and we don't play it at all, there's so much learnings. We knew exactly what we was doing every single round. Like we call it almost every single round. We have the setup. They are just so much individually better than us that day. And it's like the V versus Plow with like 15,000 screaming Polish guys. Like we just met our match. Like didn't matter if we knew, look, that's a smoke here. They're going to come execute A. We were all set up. Like they were just absolutely destroying us. So I think that I would say, the Fnatic one, for sure. I feel like we should have probably won it had we had our heads set in or heads in the right place. The Katowice one, I actually feel like we did choke. We didn't show up there. It wasn't just me, right? Like 944, whatever. Like nobody showed up in that game. And that could be a lot of things. It could be the pressure, come with like, oh, we're expecting to win. We're playing we're basically not playing to win. We're just playing not to lose, right? There's a different mentality there. If you're playing to win, like regressive, you don't care about the opponents. If you're playing not to lose, you're defensive, you're turtling, you don't want to make mistakes. And I think for both of them, it's what you saw. We played because we didn't want to lose. The last major we won, we played because we really wanted to win. And that I think you can see that in the results as well, and the games we come back from and all that as well. Like you said, we were expecting not to win that event, but for us, we're like, no, we're winning. Sure. We're playing to win, right?
I've got a weird question for you, so just bear with me in the setup because it's a bit out there. By the way, if it's all bullshit, just obviously tell me. Don't worry, it'll all be cool. Right? The question goes like this, right? Unsurprisingly, when you're a boy and you go to school and you're in history class, obviously the history class is going to be tailored around either really famous things like the Roman Empire, or it's going to be World War II. And I can tell you, spoiler, if you're in England especially, which has a very long history, they don't tell you about the history of Sweden, unsurprisingly, because in our world, you don't exist. We were just all our shit, the Empire, the America, and World War II. You skip rest of us. But the joke is, if people don't know, because a lot of modern people only know the vision of modern Sweden, you're all going to think that this is what that point I'm going to get to. They have sold the best fucking marketing story ever about Sweden. That it is this, Scandinavian utopia. There's no violence there. We're evolved. We're beyond that. And what's great about it is no one knows that the history of Sweden is these are the fucking dominators of that region. What are you talking about? The joke is not only did they own all of the Nordic countries, they went down into Europe in that thing, the deluge, and they were fucking up the Eastern Europeans. I'll tell you right now. If you don't know, the joke is is those people in that region were like slaves and like fucking sort of like they were like owned by Sweden essentially at one point. So Sweden actually historically is a very ambitious country with massive ideas. So here's what I'm going to get to. I actually feel like when Swedish teams are on top, your team, when Fnatic was on top, this is one thing I've noticed that doesn't exist with some of the modern Swedish players is there's actually a weird thing where when people see all these things, oh, Sweden has these social systems and they allow a lot of foreigners and stuff. No, that sounds like it's just an awesome thing. It's just being like a fucking altruistic person. It's being a good person. But I actually think in a weird way, Fifflaren, that part of it is it's a sort of arrogance though. It's actually the idea that like, because we're so brilliant and evolved, of course we can help out these poor people. And of course, we've got all this money. Of course we can give some to the plebs and the fucking peons. And then what I'm going to get to is this. I actually feel like when Swedish teams are on top, part of what actually is a good thing is they have a crazy ego, but that they should be the best. Actually, the joke is, of course we should win them. If we're the best Swedish team, we should be the best in the world. Like, that's the obvious assumption. I even feel like that's why the old school guys don't get why these newer Swedish players, like, actually, we're just normal people, like, we're not even that good, we can't get in teams, no one gives a fuck. That's why if you listen to all the old guard, they just make it like, just make a team, go hard, and like, come on, you're Swedish basically, like, it's almost your birthright to be the kings of CS. It's actually, if you don't know the history of Counter-Strike, even to this day with all the trials, the most dominant region in all versions of Counter is Sweden. It's easy, mate. Like, all the majors from fucking CS, in CSGO, these teams were dominant. What do you think on this aspect? Is it totally out there as an angle? Because I actually feel like in a way, like I say, I actually think it's like deceptive. I think it looks like they're all just super chill. I think in a way, it's a different way of being like, it's the ultimate confidence. It's not American style where it's like, yeah, fuck yeah, USA. It's like a different type. What would you say to this? What's the Swedish identity in CS, do you think?
I think you're onto something there. I think it's like this introverted confidence where like you don't, because you never see like the interviews right away we're the best or whatever. Like it's just quiet. And I think a good reason for that is like there is, I just don't strike like Swedish players to me doesn't strike like braggers. Like they're confident and they're cocky, right? But like, when we were dominant, like we never hung out with Fnatic, for example, like I would never even know how they are like people. I think they're very private. But I will say this, because like you mentioned with Swedish history for Counter-Strike, I feel like a big piece and probably a big reason why Sweden is nowhere on the map anymore is because we went from being that of like we are the shit, like everything goes through us, like we are developing, like if you want to be like best in Counter-Strike, it's Sweden. So in CS 1.6 Source, like in the beginning of CSGO, the one thing that Sweden had was a massive community. It had like these massive leagues. It was like these like FPL basically, like pickup games, but it was always like Swedish players, like it was everywhere, like an IRC or whatever. When CSGO came out and it became more global, like that side, and it's actually something that I told Farberg and them when I stopped playing, and I said you have to be more in tune with the Swedish space, like community, because at the moment the way that you're playing, you're practicing, you're doing FPL with like everyone, like you're playing against Russians and stuff, and like Russian mentality from PS, it's so different. Like we play the game very differently, but if that's all you're playing against because they're the best players in Europe, you're not only are you not growing the space at all, you're not teaching the youth, like you're not getting to a point where it's a cycle. Like there's a reason why CS 1.6, even the tier 2 teams were like really good. Yes. Like, and they were farmer teams essentially, like he's up the next and whatever. And you always have this like massive, like just a ton of like internal leagues, like ladders and whatever. And it wasn't just like, I'm Fifflaren, like I don't want to play against like with this like tier 2 Swedish player. I'm going to go play FPL with Saiwu. It's like because that's where I'm at, and I think that's the detriment of Swedish Counter-Strike where it says now. And people told us that about us, right? Like, NIP didn't help out in like that development, and I can agree with that. Like we were like we never played, like we never scrimmed on the side because we were so busy. But like after the fact of like being able to like play with the community. That's why I admire so much what JW has gone and done. It's kind of what you were speaking towards of like, well, why don't you just go and make a team? Then if you're good enough, just go and make a team. He's out of all of them, every single one, he's the only one that I guess Flusha helped co-launch it. But he's out of all the pros in that stature of what he has accomplished, is the one guy that's willing to put his money where his mouth is. And I'm like, I'm going to run this org. I'm the captain and I'm going to grow and I'm going to develop these guys. Right. And like, Pronex was the face of Godsend for like a little bit, but I think what JW is doing, it's something, unfortunately, I think because of the trajectory we had and because we basically became stars and a little bit like C-list celebrities in Sweden, I think you get to a point where you feel like you're too good enough. Like you're too good for them.
Yeah.
You know, versus in reality, it's like, well, how did it work in Source? I was one of the best players in Source. What did I do? I played with my friends every single night, and they're Swedish, and there's the community,
Yes.
right? And like the better I help them get, the better practice I'm going to get, right? Because I'm also having fun at the same time. Like,
Yes.
not only, I used to laugh so much because Freiburg, I got to go and play, and he would join FPL, and he would literally sit for 4 hours being so upset because he's playing against people that have a very different play style, and he feels like he's not learning, and he just rinse repeating. I'm just going to queue up again and be like, but what are you learning? Like, why wouldn't you instead play with like a bunch of friends that you can have a good time with? And like these guys also, like, look at Monacy, like these kids, they find shit everywhere. They find these little things. I swear, like that's how it is, like in every single region. So I think that's where like Swedish CS is behind. That we never entertained that. Neither did Fnatic, right? Neither did NIP. We never did anything with the bottom bunch, and it was them only two. So all these kids, then they say, well, where's the route for me to become someone? There doesn't exist here. For all I know, those kids went to Valorant, right? Or like you said, went to Fortnite, because they realized that like back in the day, even when I was aspiring, I used to grow up watching Heathen, right? Be like, oh, like I could see my steps. There was ladders, like there's leagues. I can see envisioning like steps in how to get there.
Yes,
it's very difficult for that nowadays, and I'd argue that's also why the North America is in such bad shape and continues to be, right? It's like there's nothing. It's a top portion and it's nothing. So then it's like, well, how do I get there? Like my parent, like I need to get paid, and then they're unreasonable because they need to get paid. But it's just like you're playing in tier 3, like you shouldn't get paid, like you should be working. And there's this clear like separation and like very clear ideation of like how it's supposed to be. I think it's a big reason. North America used to be better when they have CPLs, right? When they have these events, you can go and attend and do a lot of things with. None of that exists. In Europe, it does. In Sweden, you have all these leagues still and stuff. It just doesn't connect to tier 1 anymore like it used to.
Right, normally at the end of an interview like this, I'd ask, even just as a cheeky question, like CS2's out now, you know, the game's got, are you going to come back? In your case, I'm going to guess not, because if people don't know, Fifflaren is a family man now. Like you're past that period in your career, right? Are there ever any thoughts though? Because I've heard even athletes, even when they're like old and they're injured, still think like, I could still play 10 minutes, or, you know, oh, maybe I could come back for one. Does the thought ever flash across your mind? Like maybe?
I'll say this, and this is friendly banter, but like, look, if Daps can come and retire, unretire 50 times, right? Like, I feel like there's a chance. I will argue still to this day as well. I think the CS mind never goes away. Like, I'm not saying I'm smarter than all of them, but I do definitely think that like the experience and stuff that I have, I think would be very good for any team, whether that be a coach. Honestly, in North America, I'd even say probably even as a player, right? Because again, like you're not looking for having 5 massive fraggers. I say that with a grain of salt. I have not played the game that
No, but
much.
I know what you mean. Like put it this way, people, like, how old are you now?
I'm 36.
Right. That's like the age Carrigan is now, basically. Like Snappy's not that much younger. Like you are right. If you do the IGL role, especially, I feel like that does have legs, right? That's experience just scales, right?
Yeah, because there's, especially when the experience doesn't exist, right? Like that's the whole point of like, if this was another, you know, same thing, like Sweden, then, you know, you had JW going down or whatever. It doesn't exist here, you know, like there's none of that. Like that's why like the meme is with Daps, because there's no one else. Same with Stanislaw. There's a reason why these two are always coming back in and out, and they are always the one that makes the top 2 teams, and then they don't make it to the next level, right? And it's rinse repeat. I'd say this, obviously, just as speaking to like where I'm at right now, I am like a co-founder and I do run my own org together with a creator. And we are in titles like Valorant, Apex, League of Legends. One big thing that I get asked a lot.
Oh, if the people don't know, don't you do like the Disguised Toast team? Is that the one I'm thinking of? This big guy who's a big guy in League. Yeah, okay, you work with him, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a content creator. In the beginning of, at the end of 2022, he made a tweet basically wanted to get into Valorant for esports, and we ended up talking. I ended up helping him set up the org as it was, and I've been there since then. But a lot of the questions that I get a lot is when is Disguised, and if Disguised is entering Counter-Strike. And I still would love to do that. You know, I think Counter-Strike will forever be in like a big passion of mine. Like I hate the fact that I'm on West Coast because there's no tournaments that align with my schedule. Sure. Like the tournaments start at 3 a.m. and then it's done by the time I'm out of my first meeting. So I'm like, Australia is actually a pretty good time zone. But yeah, outside of that, I would love to be part of the space and just be more into it. Like I miss the camaraderie. I miss the community. Like, getting a chance to even talk to you here today, right? And I still, like, some of my closest friends are still from Counter-Strike, right? So at least probably not as a player, you know, I think it's going to have to be a really good offer for me to go and coach. But I think no matter what, I do want to get back to with what I'm currently doing, hopefully get back into the CS roots. And since it's a North American org, who knows, maybe we talk about North American revival. You know, it would be cool to be part of that, right? I do think that it's possible. We saw it in the beginning of CSGO, right? It's just we just need a little bit more support and players to actually want to play to compete versus playing to just make some money, which I think is a massive differentiator between American and European players in general.
I do actually want to ask, it's one of the last questions, about that aspect you just mentioned there, because I do feel like the secret sauce of being in the esports industry that a fan will never be able to understand is actually, for real, the joke is it isn't the games, and it isn't the cities, and it isn't the stages, it really is the camaraderie of the people. It's actually the people that are cool that you meet that are the best reason. Because as you say, look, I can stop going to events, and like I'm in as an analyst, like you were as a player. Like, I've done all the majors, mate. I don't really care if you invite me to DreamHack Open, Billy, who gives a fuck. Like, I've done them, mate. Like, it's not that I'm missing, but I'll definitely miss if I see the event on and I see fucking Moses is there, or I see, like, back when Semler still worked, or if Anders is there. Basically, the people I vibe with, Jan Core, the ones that are from my day. Of course, I'll immediately miss being around those people. Or the joke is, if I'm watching the game and the tournament, I'm thinking to myself what I would be saying to Moses about this fucking, you know, I overrated this player is, or fuck, I hate how Jane plays. You know, all the great convos you have in the green room where people can just be free and be themselves. So I don't know if people realise this. Look, even though I will say that, look, especially among the fans, there are a lot of dickheads in esports too, and there's a lot of people who sometimes are shitty and fuck with you, and people in the industry who are rude or rivals. The actual quality people, no joke, they make it all worthwhile, in my opinion, for Fifflaren. Have you had a similar vibe?
Yeah, absolutely, and especially now as well. I think it was so enlightening to me when I went from Twitch into now a North American org, because obviously I've been in European orgs a lot, and I get to experience that, and getting a chance to now be in a high level in North American org. At that time, obviously, we're doing Flashpoint and stuff as well. And a big thing that I'd say is, and I think I was honestly a big reason why America is just not very successful in esports as a whole, right? Like, they have their moments, right? The E-League major for C9, like, it's one-offs here and there, but it's never any consistent. And I think it comes with two things, the upbringing, the first one. In Europe, you get grown up a little bit more with the team play environment aspect of, like, you want your play sports, sure. Like, you win as same thing. You win as a team, lose as a team. Like, not everything you can do on your side. In America, it's a little bit more of like you're becoming this quarterback. You know, you're the star player. Like, it's all about you, like your results, your tasks you have to do well, and then you add on to that with that mentality into these orgs also having a short-term thinking. You know, orgs here think, as long as we have the money, we can make anything happen. Like, just get a short-term thinking. So when you mentioned that with, like, the camaraderie of side of things, that's the one thing and the one advice I will give of, like, while it sounds awesome to be part of orgs, like, if you are thinking long-term and it's a matter of, like, hey, I'm just going to, like, stick my, like, this team is just going to come pick me up with 4 randoms, and it's not going to go very well. Like, we've seen that in North America. Like, think of League of Legends, right? Like, they get a chance for 2 weeks. Now they're there in the water. No one touches these guys again. So I would say, like, think about it for yourself of, like, it's cool to join an org, but like Duncan was saying, like, camaraderie and, like, that, like, the improvement side of things and understanding that, you know, maybe I am not the best. That's also North American. Everyone's the best, right? Like, no, there are things that you can work on. It's going to benefit you more than, for example, jumping the gun on, like, one of these orgs that honestly doesn't care about you, your well-being, or long-term success. They only care about, will you go and produce me a win tomorrow? And if you don't, you are replaceable to us. And that's how everyone works here. So a lot of the times, like you said, you don't have as much camaraderie here. It's a lot of, like, FPL toxicity, and they are all just kind of the same of, like, it's just all just very toxic, aggressive. Everyone's shit except for myself. And I think with that concept, I don't think you're going to be successful. And I don't think you will get to a point where the region as a whole is growing from that. And we saw that with CS, like, everyone dropped to Valorant. That was the org's fault as well. But you see it now as well into, like, well, heck, these franchise leagues aren't really that good because there's only 10 teams,
yes,
right? And now, you know, coming into CS next year with the rumors, if they're true, maybe that stuff is going away. So, like, here you have a full year to actually, like, start practicing and becoming someone and actually, like, start improving, knowing as well. It's kind of like in the beginning when I quit, Duncan, like you said, these orgs haven't jumped in yet. But what do you think happens when there's more opportunity and they start to see,
Yeah.
oh, actually, like, oh, I could build a team that makes a
Yes.
major. There's new orgs coming in. Now you could be part of that cycle. But it comes with the fact of like you have to work for it and make a name for it for yourself as well. But once you do, like you said, I mean, you have camaraderies and stuff for life, right? Like
Yes.
I'm so in NIP, my second year, we had a League of Legends team, and Björkson was on it, right?
Oh,
and
right,
Nuke
sure.
Dog was on it, and that's fun. Worlds go around. Look at that. I'm in Los Angeles nearby here now. Look at
Nuke
Björkson.
Dog obviously, yeah. And
there's a
coaches in the
there's a
league,
connection.
yeah, sure.
And like this space, I always say people think like it's a massive space. It is big, but in the smaller side, like the people working it, it's a very small space.
Oh, it is, yeah.
And I run into so many people, like old school people, like that I met like 10 years ago. And like you said, of like that experience that I got and the camaraderie that was given to me by, Counter-Strike, I, never gonna forget or take for granted. So.
Yes, right. At the end of the interview, Fifflaren, do you have a final message? Do you want to say hello or thank you to anyone?
No, honestly, just thank you to you, Duncan, for messaging me. I honestly did not even react to the fact that it's been close to 10 years. Like I look at it on occasion and be like, oh, it's 2020. Oh, I stopped. Oh my God, it's been like this long or whatever. And it's been like this 10 years for me. I feel like it's gone very quick. Like it definitely doesn't feel like I competed 10 years ago. Like I still feel like I'm a little bit relevant in regard of like, oh, I've done that. But like now it's like, yeah, you're basically in the grave.
Sure.
But it is fun. I mean, at the end of the day, like for me getting a chance to be part of the space, getting the opportunity here to like have the chat with you and stuff like that, I think, thank you. And thank you for everyone that's been listening. I don't even know how long we've been talking, but if you guys made it this far, blessings and, thank you guys for tuning in. But always just a fun time chatting with you, Duncan. And yeah, appreciate you and your friends.
Tack så mycket.
Varsågod.
I've had to make a lot of tough choices in my career, but thanks to the support of my Patreon community, the Illuminati, I never have to make tough financial decisions. So this video and all the rest on my channel are kindly supported by Ahmed Haju, Frisky, Mac Pugnaccio Racula, Animosity, Jensen Gore, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it if you've ever heard before, and you'll hear it many times in the future. A special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerry Keys Minion. Do you want to ask a question in my video AMA? Do you want to be part of one of those long discussions where we talk about whatever you like in esports? Do you want teasers, find out who the upcoming guests are going to be? Or maybe you want to suggest a topic for a future Thorin's Thoughts type video? Well, if any of these perks or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is today and join the Illuminati by joining the Patreon link in the description box below.